we've got so much to talk about. You're a philosopher and a historian of ideas. You've also written multiple acclaimed books and currently working on a biography of anthropologist Franz Boas. Um, how did you come to all of this?
Goodness. Well, it all began in Paris, where I grew up. Uh, perhaps. I did tell the story a little bit in my latest book, the Ceiling Outside, The Science and Experience of the Disrupted Mind, which came out about just over a year ago. And thank you. And I did tell the story at the beginning because the book is about the mind, the brain-body nexus, really, and the sense of self, the embodied sense of self. And these are questions I started asking myself when I was really a child. I think I've always been weirdly obsessed with consciousness and, what is the self and how do we think and how does it all work? But I was never good in math. I was terrible at math. And in France, if you weren't good at math, you could just forget about even thinking of going into biology or anything like that, or even medicine. I think I would have been probably a good doctor. But that didn't happen. And so inevitably I went to Britain. Did my undergraduate, all my studies in London, and I studied first philosophy and the analytical mode. Of course, it was the 90s London. It was very analytical.
Good old-fashioned Anglo-American philosophy, lots of maths,
and there was
lots of maths, and simple.
It was basically the remnants of logical positivism, and I studied that along with German, which was a degree they had to create for me because there were no connections between the two disciplines at the time, and but and then I realized quickly that even though what I liked most in my philosophy degree were I guess was ethics and philosophy of mind, but what I really quickly realized that the questions in philosophy were just biting your own tail. There was nothing feeding the conceptual argumentation. And so after some other journeys, my journey is actually a bit more complicated than all that, but basically after a while and going to America and working with the New York Review of Books and doing this and doing that, I ended up going to the Warwick Institute and did their MA in the history of ideas about the Renaissance, and then did my PhD on the mind-body relation in the late 17th century. So I went into the historical arena, early modern period. I suppose 17th century, I could still call it my century because when you go into these things, you choose your period and you stay there in a way, even though I'm no longer doing actively any research at all in that area. But the time of the scientific revolution, of the revisions about, ways of looking at the mind, which were suddenly mechanistic, and the problem of the soul, what do you do with the soul, to me were equivalents to the ideas, to the anxieties that were floating around, especially then in the late 90s, about consciousness that were being debated in the cognitive sciences, even though people there were not reading history.